In today's world, baby boomers were really the first generation where both husband and wife worked. The silent generation wasn't that way. So both husband and wife have worked, and now many of them, they may not have had children. So who's going to care for me if my children don't do it any longer?
One of the challenges that our generation faces, and the boomers as well, is that over the years, the type of retirement options, and over the last 20, 30 years, those kinds of programs have declined. So everybody's out there trying to figure out how to save money for retirement, and that includes people in my generation as well.
And welcome back to This Day and Age, where we continue to bring together experts in all things aging, providing vital information to help you and your loved ones make confident decisions while navigating life's journey. And I'm your host, Phil Tower. Every generation is shaped by a number of shared historical events and experiences that lead to general cultural and personality characteristics that a lot of folks in that generation often end up sharing. They're common experiences, as we call them. And for the baby boomers, as they continue to enter retirement age, these characteristics will change the senior living and care industry. Today, I'm very glad to be joined by Dr. Priscilla Kimboko. She is professor of health, also an expert in gerontology at Grand Valley State University. She's here to help us learn more about some of the key differences between the boomers and the generation that preceded them, as well as Dave Tiesenga. He's returned to This Day and Age as a guest. He is Chief Strategy Officer at Holland Home. He's here to weigh in on how those differences will affect the senior living and care industry. Welcome to both of you. Priscilla, great to have you with us. And Dave, welcome back.
Yeah, thank you.
Good to have you here. There are, as we talked about, some obvious generational differences. There are currently three very different generations. There's some crossover there a little bit too, or at least people may have those perceptions. But those three generations make up senior and the aging population. I'd like to help our listeners on this podcast kind of walk through what each generation is, let's give a face to those people in that generation, and some of the key events and life experiences that shaped them. And as we start out, we'll talk about the boomers. A lot of people may say the world adopted to the boomers, the silent generation adopted to the world. It's a common phrase, and as we may have noticed on social media these days, it's fun to poke fun of the boomers. It just seems to be a thing. But I'm going to start with you, if it's okay, Dr. Priscilla Kimboko, and talk about, first of all, the greatest generation. This is the generation that was born between 1901 and 1927. These are the people that we learned that had really experienced life in a way many of us will hopefully never realize, living through and during the Great Depression. Dr. Priscilla Kimboko, help our listeners understand about this greatest generation.
When I think about the greatest generation, starting like in 1900, think about the world at that time in terms of the public health issues and the kinds of diseases and so on that they were exposed to, and World War I, which I didn't experience and don't know as much about, but that at the end of that, they had their plague or whatever you want to call it, 1918. So they lived through that. Many lived through that period where people were dying, kind of like we saw in COVID. Mm-hmm. And then, there was a decade that was very prosperous, the roaring 20s. Yes. And then suddenly there was a collapse of the stock market and the Depression. So they had these kind of major activities that were occurring in society, in the world, that they lived through and lived with. And so I remember having some interviews of people that lived in that period and who were in that generation. And particularly here in Michigan, we had some interviews in one of our conference sessions. And people talked about how they survived the Depression, how they dealt with, raising their own gardens, and they had their, they were very tight with their money. They didn't give it away, and that they helped each other. So there were things that they experienced in life that none of the rest of us in the more recent generations have had to cope with. They also then were in World War II as soldiers, many,
Yeah.
My father and mother were both in that generation, and they had their victory garden, and, they did all kinds of things to survive and to help others.
Very patriotic.
Mm-hmm. Very patriotic. Everybody pitched in during that World War II. You know, it was kind of your duty to pitch in, not to buy things, but to pitch in.
And a lot of that very careful penny pitching, if you will, got passed on to the next generation, the silent generation, and the boomers certainly later heard about that. Dave Tiesenga is Chief Strategy Officer here at Holland Home. The silent generation, a lot of these people are living here at Holland Home communities. They are really I would say, a more robust age than a lot of people would realize. But as we think about this is people born between 1928 and 1945. It's pretty interesting. It's a pretty big group as well. Interesting to know, we were just talking about the greatest generation. There are fewer than 100,000 left today in this country. Dave Tiesenga, talk a little bit about the silent generation here. You get to work with them on an ongoing basis here at Holland Home.
Yeah, so the silent generation are folks who are 78 to 95 years old today. So when we think of the average person who's moving in today, it's they're age 78 into independent living. Age 77 is the beginning of the baby boomer. So I even see differences between that 95-year-old, which was the beginning of the silent generation, and the 78-year-old.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
They just don't flip a switch on them. But they've been thrifty all their lives. They've been respectful, unassuming, loyal, and you see a lot of those characteristics in the folks that we've been providing care and services to over the last 100 years for them.
And you mentioned, I want to go back to what you said, a 78-year-old and a 95-year-old are a part of the silent generation, but they are different kind of generationally as well. Fair enough to say?
Sure. I mean, if you just think of technology alone, many 95-year-olds are happy maybe just to turn on a smartphone and make a call on it, where most of our 78-year-olds coming in today have smartphones. They're very much more technology savvy and being able to work through research on the web, and they come in much more informed, as opposed to kind of a paper generation where they're relying upon materials and so forth that you handed to them.
And they pass down many of their traits to the boomers, fair to say.
Yeah.
It's interesting. The 77-year-old is at the tip end of the baby boomers, and you see that overlap in there. Dr. Priscilla Kimboko, I'll have you add to anything that Dave might have said about the silent generation. They are definitely a robust group, that 78 to 95-year-old, and a lot of them, thankfully, still with us today.
Well, I am one, so I can talk a little bit from the tail end of that generation.
Okay.
44, right? So
yeah.
I think that we did learn a lot from our parents in terms of loyalty, in terms of work, but we've also been through the rotating, constantly changing technologies since early in our lives, right? TV became a thing, and then color TV, and then, it goes on. And the phones. When I was a child, we had a phone where we had to turn the handle to get the operator to get on the party line. And, today I can carry that thing around with me in the whole library as well. So... And I think our generation has adapted to that as long as they've been able to maintain good health and so on. But that's one of the challenges. I think we really, I say we because I am one, we really are, trying to keep up, but things don't necessarily work for everyone. Work-related things, for example. I'm still in work, but not everybody is. A lot of people want to be out of that. But, we believe that you do the job you've been given, and you don't try to change things too much. Mm-hmm. You do your best and expect to be rewarded, that kind of thing, whereas the younger generations have different approaches.
And if I can focus on you for a moment, you are not an exception. The way I want to say this is, at your age, a lot of people have retired, but there are more and more people who are in their mid to late 70s who are still working, and you're...
I'm one of them.
Yes, and working a pretty active schedule, some because they have to, but a lot because it's passion for them.
Well, everybody needs a sense of purpose in life, and when you retire, sometimes you lose that. And I've kind of observed that over the years, so that I am choosing to keep working because it gets me engaged. I have a role in society that's meaningful, and, all of those things that we worry about for older adults. On the other hand, not everybody can. I have the kind of work that I can do that, and not everyone has that opportunity. And so the challenge is, how do you cope? One of the challenges that our generation faces, and the boomers as well, is that over the years, the type of retirement options have changed. You used to have kind of predictable retirement packages that you could count on. They were fixed, you got the benefits and you paid in and the employer paid in. And over the last 20, 30 years, those kinds of programs have declined. So everybody's out there trying to figure out how to save money for retirement, and that includes people in my generation as well.
It's a great point, and it is a reality they're facing. Dave Tiesenga, I will turn to you for the baby boomer generation, born between 1946 to 1964. For full disclosure, there are a couple of us in this podcast episode who are in the boomer generation toward the end of that, and we could completely confuse our listeners if we went through like the next three generations after that. For the sake of this episode, we're going to focus on the greatest generation, the silent generation, and the boomers. So what do we know about boomers, Dave Tiesenga? You and I are boomers. Talk about those guys, if you will, those guys and gals.
Yeah, I think a boomer is a little bit more demanding. I think that a boomer is probably a little bit more independent. I think to Priscilla's point about pension plans, boomers tend to buy now and think about paying it later. So not only is this whole issue of retirement savings and pension defined benefit plans versus having maybe a 401k plan an issue, I think it's the issue of a lot of baby boomers maybe don't have retirement plans and don't have the savings that the previous two generations have. And we see that with some boomers when they do their financial disclosures. Oftentimes if you were dealing with somebody in the silent generation and they're coming in, they didn't have a mortgage on their house anymore when they got to retirement, but sometimes today there is a mortgage on the house. So I think that the world has marketed to the demands of the baby boomer generation, and they've gone out and bought things. And so they still have those demands. So we even see that difference as they look to move into our independent living. They have different expectations. Before, we could build a retirement building and we could put all of the same finishes on all of the units, and the silent generation would come in and buy it. Well, today, we have an entire intake process where somebody can come in and choose all those finishes. And they're not sometimes just standard finishes, but they need the upgrades, right? They have to have the stainless steel and the granite and the quartz and all of those nice things. So I think it's their expectation is much higher. And then beyond that, I think from a programming standpoint, what I see too is just a higher demand for life experiences. People aren't coming here to do nothing. They want to know as they move in that there's opportunity to intellectually be stimulated, but wellness is a huge factor in that. We have wellness coaches. We have software that tracks how well I'm doing with my wellness programs. So I think those demands are much higher as well.
We're speaking with Dr. Priscilla Kimboko. She is a professor of health at Grand Valley State University, also an expert in gerontology. Also with us, you just heard from Dave Tiesenga, Chief Strategy Officer at Holland Home. As we contrast and compare these generational differences, we've talked about the greatest generation born between 1901 and 1927, the silent generation, those born between 1928 and 1945, and the boomers, 1946 to 1964. Dave, I want to go back to you to talk a little bit more about how all of those differences intersecting, and maybe not as much with the greatest generation, but especially with the silent generation and the boomers, those intersections and how you deal with people who come to you and say, I want to live independently in a community here, but they have different demands, different needs. You talked about the customization, but could you expand on that a little bit more? I mean, they're different people with different experiences.
Yeah, so I think what our programs end up being a lot more expansive. There's a lot more flexibility. People can choose what they'd like to do, what they're a lot of people are very interested in volunteering, so they want to have service capabilities and the ability to continue to do good things in their retirement years. I think the other thing that's interesting is that the baby boomer population is such a large group of people. It's 70 million people, where the silent generation was 19 million. So there's just this mass of people who are kind of moving through this generation and moving into the space that we provide senior housing for. So we do know this, is that 75% of seniors don't even care to live in a senior living community. They want to live at home. So we've got to have flexibility in programming to provide services to them at home. What's also interesting about that is for those who want to move in, we need that flexibility, but also be able to provide it to them at home. But what we also realize is that the caregivers, those who are going to provide support, they're now part of that baby boomer group that are retiring. So it used to be in 2020, there were 6 caregivers for every single person over the age of 85. As the baby boomers go into retirement, by the time you get to 2040, that caregiver ratio of 6-to-1 goes to 3-to-1. So oftentimes when you think about just the generational differences, there aren't as many people to care for seniors. And part of that's driven by the mass of the baby boomer group, but also some of it's based on life expectancy is longer. The baby boomers have a longer life expectancy than any generation that preceded them. So both of those things are creating a much larger population to care for.
It's interesting. You were going to say something, Dr.
No, I
Priscilla.
was just thinking about baby boomers starting in the, their lifespan has been, and what have they encountered? They encountered the, Kennedy was killed, right? They encountered the moon, going to the moon, so that they encountered Vietnam War. They encountered all these kinds of life things, but they've also had a role, the hippie era where people were wearing flowers, and then there were other people who were bombing university labs because they didn't want to support the war. So they lived through some turbulent times that, and they had this advocacy perspective. They made a difference in women's work and all of these other things. So they have lived through some really challenging times, and they're still looking to make a difference. Yeah. Some of what you're saying. And they've also been able to buy that second house and upgrade and make all the choices. So they've had that kind of experience. But it's not, that kind of came out of World War II, with all the support for building houses. So they've lived in a different environment than their parents lived, and they really carry those attitudes and hopes with them into their later years. And you mentioned that not everybody wants to live in a retirement community because they want to live in their home that they've now made their own, right? And they want to age in place, but who's going to take care if they need assistance? Those are the kinds of questions they don't always face up to, I think.
Well, and I wanted to interrupt right there, because not only do they not face up to that and think about it, because there's no place like home, they have misperceptions about senior communities. They think it's the same senior community that they saw their parents or grandparents age in, and they don't know about that. And I bet you've seen that transformation from, I'm always going to live at home, to, hey, I could really get used to this real fast. Fair enough to say, Dave?
I think in responding to the demands, and this really started at the end of the silent generation, we're much more expansive in our programming. So there's pickleball, there's bocce, we have wellness gyms, so you don't have to go down to the gym at the corner someplace. We have those here, so you can keep active with that. We have active adult learning programs. I mean, part of life is just being engaged and wondering about all the things that you couldn't get to when you were spending all this time working, because the baby boomers have always been competitive, very invested in their work. And now here's a time during retirement to say, hey, maybe I'd like to learn a little bit more about a particular subject. All those things are available in senior living programs that we have. We have lifelong learning programs, we have wellness programs, and we have the traditional stuff that's there too, because we do serve those older generations that are there. So we have the Bible studies, we have the bingo, we have the chair aerobics, we have all those things as well, but much more expansive for the baby boomer population.
I think it's important also to point out with all these changings, seismic changes, demographics, cultural shifts, the aging population, we've also got to be paying attention to the children of these older adults because they are changing before our eyes. This is a lot of them who are Gen Xers, and we could do a full podcast episode on them, but this is a group often worried about financial security, being aware of that, how to pay for living in a senior community. These are all new issues, but let's talk about this and how providers need to shift to appease to and relate to the children of these aging adults. Dave Tiesenga, you got to start planning for this now, right?
Yeah, absolutely we are. We, I think oftentimes we have to sell the children for the parents to move in. And these are children of boomers who have been given everything. Boomers have taken very good care of their children. We have to be something that's desirable for the children, for mom and dad to be at, as well as having a great place for mom and dad to go.
Priscilla, can you talk about the children of the silent generation? And a lot of them are Gen X, but a lot of them, as Dave Tiesenga said, really have just had so much, yet they want to feel empowered as well. Yet maybe they're starting to think about the future a little bit more.
Well, I think my belief is that more and more people, no matter if they're still boomers or they're Gen X, are looking at things like healthy living, wellness, all of those elements. And so they want the best for their parents, but they also don't want their parents to spend everything they have on where they live. There's something about Gen Z or Gen X that they didn't quite get the same opportunities as the boomers, and they're still competing with boomers in the workplace in many instances. So they're a generation that's kind of left out there without a lot of representation. Boomers are out there, and the older generations have the resources to living in these kind of environments. How do you save for this when you don't know how long you're going to live? Because the thing that everyone faces today is long lives are unpredictable. You don't know how long you're going to need to save for. And so think about it. If you retire at 66, I guess is now the age, or 67, for Social Security to get full benefit, you may live another 30 years. So imagine trying to plan and prepare and be ready for, that many years of living, not knowing whether you're going to continue working. We have to realize that they're kind of a disadvantaged generation in many ways. And so they're disadvantaged in the fact of job opportunities and growth because they've been competing their whole lives with the boomers.
But also, and Dave, I want to have you touch on this again, the boomers have seen those pensions disappear or be greatly reduced. They have seen limits to their 401k plan. They saw the crash in 2008 of the stock market that scared a lot of people. And so they're thinking about that. Many of them may be choosing to work longer. Can you talk about that as well as planning for the future and looking at senior living maybe 10 or 15 years from now?
Yeah, so I think a couple of things with that. Certainly, the baby boomers continue to work. I think the pandemic kicked a lot of us out of it. We said enough of this. I'm at a point where I can retire. I'm going to be done. But I think there's a purpose. Our work is our purpose. And so when that work ends, you lose that purpose. So a lot of baby boomers continue to do work. It may not be what their vocation was for their entire career, but it's doing something. So I think a lot of baby boomers continue to work. I think also the folks that are age 45 to 65 today, 16% of them don't have children. And so you have an entire different perspective on, well, who's going to help me out if I don't move into a retirement home? Because I can't rely on my children. And in today's world, baby boomers were really the first generation where both husband and wife worked.
Right.
The silent generation wasn't that way. So both husband and wife have worked. And now many of them, they may not have had children. So who's going to care for me if my children don't do it any longer? So I think those are the types of things that you have to look for your particular situation. I think we've said this in earlier podcasts. Planning is a big thing that we need to look forward to. Talk these things through with your kids. What happens? And if you don't have kids, your siblings and maybe nieces and nephews, what happens if I need support? So I think we're out in front of people and trying to provide them as much information about what benefits are here at Holland Home that they can take advantage of, or services through our home care agencies to provide back to them.
Yeah, that's a great point to make. And I have to be careful as I touch on this, but I just had a thought as you were talking about that, Dave Tiesenga, that it seems as if in the silent generation, and perhaps generations before that, we were really good at caregiving in families, that caring for the older parents and older aunts and uncles, oftentimes all living together. It seems like generation from generation that has kind of gone away, where some parents, some adult children today are like, well, my sister's there with mom and dad, I can just let them do that. I think that's an area we're also seeing, in addition to that 16% that have no kids to care for them as well. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I think it is. And then on top of that, certainly in the baby boomer generation, sometimes they call it the sandwich generation. They're providing support and services for their parents who are still here, yet they have kids who still need that support, and they have all the stresses of that going forward as well.
Indeed.
Yeah, and you can be any age actually and be in the sandwich generation, but it's very common for baby boomers and they may be caring for a spouse as well. So a lot of caregiving responsibilities is something that people will encounter. And I think you're raising a really good issue about the childless couples who thought that was a wise decision, and it probably was up until they need help, right?
Yeah.
So
are we ready for that in terms of those people who don't have family caregivers built in?
Well, we're certainly trying to prepare our systems for anybody who move into our facilities. And so I think one of the benefits that we have is taking advantage of technologies. So that's the beauty of whether that's artificial intelligence helping us with some of the things that need to be done every day, whether those are remote telehealth types of objects.
Sure.
All of our smart home technology, many of us already have that in our houses today. Simple things like Ring doorbells and turning lights on and, having my climate control happen. I think all of those things can support a more efficient way to provide care. And we'll have to continue to learn on those things and take advantage of new technologies just because there aren't enough people down the road to provide that.
Alexa, dress me, and then take the dog out.
Exactly.
It'd be perfect. We'll work on that. Real quickly, I want to give each of you a chance to leave any final thoughts or wisdom on this really important topic of generational shifting, generations colliding, and senior living, and just looking at the future. I'll start with you, Dr. Priscilla Kimboko. Words of wisdom you would leave our listeners.
Well, I think all of us should be thinking about improving our health span. In other words, taking active role in your own health is really important, and start it now wherever you are in age. And I think that that's one of the solutions for caregiving, is that you take care of yourself, and you're one of the people who's doing that, taking that active role. Beyond that, I think we all need to realize that there's so many differences even within a generation in terms of people's attitudes. And I've said earlier, I think that I don't really buy into the whole idea of generational differences, because I think there's a lot of things that people have that are individualized. So I know you talk a lot about personal care and personalized attention, and I think that's important no matter who's working with the older adult and their family, that it's personalized to that person. And so I think both of those are really important. we're all going to age. That's the beauty of life. It's part of the process of life. It would be great if we could drop some of our ageist outlooks and attitudes in society. So I'm putting in a little plug for that idea that think about your own attitudes and beliefs about older people and then check them. Are they really valid? Because there's so many myths and stereotypes about what older people want and how they behave and how they think. So personalized, self-care, and ageist attitudes, get rid of them. And then do a really good job when you work with them. I know you all do.
Good wisdom. Dave Tiesenga?
Yeah, I think Priscilla said it very nicely. I think the wellness, healthy living are key, and we certainly see seniors moving into communities recognizing that, and so I think that's a big thing. And then how do you support that? How do you support that with personal trainers, dietitians, folks that can help them deal with that? But also, I think along with that comes knee replacements, hip replacements. And so being connected to a system where I can get the rehab when I need it. And then just get involved in programming where you can continually learn about keeping yourself invested into what's going on in life and learning new things.
Good words of wisdom from Dave Tiesenga. He's been our guest. Dave is Chief Strategy Officer here at Holland Home, as well as I want to thank our guest, Dr. Priscilla Kimboko, Professor of Health Administration, also an expert, as you heard, in gerontology and talking about the generations. Really good stuff. And we want to invite you, our listener, to continue to stay tuned to This Day and Age as we will dive deeper into topics affecting the growing, aging population in all of our future episodes. In the meantime, you can visit thisdayandage.org. Again, the website is thisdayandage.org, where you are able to see all of our past episodes, catch up on some of the important conversations you may have missed, including episodes about technology and a lot more. Be sure to subscribe to our podcast as well. And do us a favor, share it with a family member or a friend as well so they can stay informed on thinking about the future and all things aging and make confident decisions as they age well and live a long, healthy life. And until next time, for This Day and Age, I'm your host, Phil Tower. Thank you for listening.